Hello there and welcome to another of our pre-auction videos. Today going one after another, but no less interesting and full of the good medals we have on offer. This video is giving you all a preview of our auction which will take place here in London on Tuesday the 4th of April, and another bumper sale, just over 600 lots. The print catalogue will be with you now. Spink Live bidding has been open for about a week and it's already a furious fiesta on there, and lots of bids coming in for lots of items, which is very exciting to see. The auction itself runs the normal format as you'd expect, the single campaigns, lots of good campaign groups, a rather good array of Jutland awards you'll see smattered through the auction. The usual consignments, lots of them from families, so on offer to the market for the first occasion. And I think, as you'll see throughout this video, there is pretty much something in there for every taste and every budget as well. So it's a good way to add to your collection, and it will be an exciting day. So obviously, as ever, any inquiries, please just be in touch with myself, Harry, Robert or John. And we'll all be here on the auction day, and you'll see us all up on Spink Live taking to the rostrum also. A couple of special collections which you'll see in the auction. They include a fascinating small section of awards related to the Challenger expedition, including a very fine Arctic medal to one of the sledging parties, and also a really interesting collection of Royal Household awards, including some very rare full size and also some very rare miniature groups. So for all the miniature collectors out there, make a beeline for the Royal section as well as the miniature medals section, which is brimful as ever. And perhaps the special collection that I should make special notice of, and actually features two of the lots showing here that I'm going to tell you a little bit more about, is the collection of the late Brian Russell, also known as Kala Singh, and his wife Nirmal. And Brian, many of you will know in the hobby, was a passionate collector for everything Indian Army over decades and decades, and a number of you will probably have visited his house, which rightly is considered, or was considered, to be a museum full of incredible, rare, unique pieces, lots of uniforms, swords, militaria, and thankfully for us, some medals, which are pretty stunning. A good collection of those being offered in this sale. And it's also worth noting the special introduction, which does feature in the print catalogue. So do go and have a look about that. Read a bit more about Brian's fascinating life and his his contributions to the study of the Indian Army through the ages. A number of his items have been donated to the National Army Museum, so they will be available for collectors, researchers for generations to come. But we here at Spink are thrilled to have the opportunity to offer orders, decorations and medals from the collection. And I'm going to talk to you very briefly just about two of them. But there really is a fantastic offering. The singles, again, you've got some of the really famous clasps for the Army of India, the Corrigan, all those famous battles, so do go and have a read of that. Lots of Indian Orders of Merit. I think we've got 4 or 5 being offered. Besides that, some really interesting campaign groups and some interesting prize medals also. So well worth the read. Any Indian Army collector, this is a bit of a feast for you. So I'm going to begin with lot 232, and the absolutely stunning and unique combination of clasp, Army of India medal awarded to Lieutenant Colonel Pester. And this medal, for those of you who regularly read our catalogues, was one of Brian's final acquisitions 5 or 6 years ago, when we did have the opportunity to sell it. And it's not it won't be the second time, it'll actually be the third time it's been sold by Spink, being sold by us in 1997. So lovely to see these rare awards coming back across the block with us. And the story of Lieutenant Colonel Pester can't be told best by me in this little video. Do go and read the online listing or the catalogue itself. His story and the crusade of General Lake in India is absolutely fascinating. At the Battle of Delhi, Pester rode at the head of his regiment and had his horse shot from underneath him. He also was the author of War and Sport in India, which is a widely quoted reference work for this period of Indian history and the British campaign there. So Pester really one of the key players in this campaign, and his absolutely superb and unique three-clasp Army of India medal tells that story. It carries a pre-sale estimate of 20 to 25,000, and we will see what happens on the day. It is an absolute stunner and could be the cornerstone to your collection for the next generation. So we'll move on from campaign to a gallantry group and the Indian Order of Merit. This is lot 213 and is the Cora D-File Indian Order of Merit Group of 3 to Havildar Sodar Singh of the 14th Sikhs. And he shared in that famous action in the Cora D-File around Chitral, and was one of those fortunate men to come out of that, along with Lieutenant Jones, who won himself a DSO. The 14 surviving Sikhs all earned themselves the Indian Order of Merit. This group, again, has been off the market for over a decade. It's rather charming, actually, that it comes with his Delhi Durbar for 1903, so he remained in the service. And again, it is an absolute classic and could be the core for any Indian Army Northwest Frontier, Chitral campaign collection. Again, a really rare, really special group, and a pre-sale estimate of 4,000 to 6,000. That should be well exceeded on the day, but do get your bids in, and any inquiries, we'd be very pleased to assist you. So those are just two groups from the collection of the late Brian and Nermal Russell. Again, it is a once-in-a-generation offering, and I really can't state that enough. So do go online, do have a read. It's been an absolute pleasure to assist Nermal with this, and we hope that the bidders will agree with us on the 4th of April. So we move from one hugely famous event to another with lot 49. Some of you from a distance might say, well, that's a humble China medal, but look a little bit closer and you'll see that it bears the famous clasp Defence of Legations, ranking surely amongst the most famous of defences in the annals of British military history, right up there, as you know, with Mafeking and Rorke's Drift and all these famous events. First time in a number of years that we've had the opportunity to offer a Defence of Legations medal, and this one is a rather good one. It's to James Smythe of the Chinese Imperial Customs, and another interesting addition to his story is he was actually mentioned in dispatches for his fine efforts. When the siege began on the 20th of June 1900 and the European legations were laid siege by tens and tens of thousands of the Boxers, he was in hospital. He was incredibly ill, but as soon as he became well, he was one of the first men to man the barricades, and during that famous 55-day siege, he clearly played a key part, being mentioned. Again, this medal has been seen on the market a couple of times. The last time, I believe, was during the late 1980s, when it featured in a collection of, as you guessed it, medals for the great defences, and has previously been in other famed collections where it was referred to as very rare. And so, again, a special medal and a pre-sale estimate of 8,000 to 10,000. And the story of Mr. Smythe of the Chinese Imperial Customs, deservedly goes down in history. And so there's his China medal. So again, much more to be said about him than I've been able to cover in the few seconds I have for you. But do go and have a read. And the final group I'd like to talk to you about today, again, showing here, is actually the back cover lot, and that is the unique Albert Medal, Stanhope Gold Medal combination awarded to George Smith for his efforts at the Woburn Brickworks in Bedfordshire in October 1908. And again, you'll see the image of George Smith on the back of the catalogue and in print, with his spade, a worker at the brickworks there, and again, the citation itself is very striking. One of his fellow workers at the brickworks was inside one of the brick kilns, again, where it's incredibly hot, heating things up to red hot conditions. One of the kilns collapsed and buried the worker up to his waist in red hot conditions. So his body was, his skin was totally burnt from the waist down. The report goes on, and George Smith selflessly entered the kiln and effected his rescue, enabling the man to be extricated. Smith himself was severely burned all over the hands and his feet, having entered the cauldron. Sadly, his colleague later passed away, but had it not have been for the efforts of Smith, he would have undoubtedly passed away in those coming moments. So a really, really moving and really special combination of awards. There are 6 or 7 combinations of the Albert Medal and the Stanhope Gold Medal, elected by the Royal Humane Society for the finest life-saving act of the year. This was voted for 1908 as that act. But what makes this unique is all of the other combinations, the few of them that there are for actions at sea. So this is the only combination of the Albert Medal for land with the Stanhope Gold Medal, and obviously in the centre his silver Royal Humane Society life-saving medal. So any life-saving collector will surely have their interest piqued by this group, and it shows on the back cover. It's lot 341 and a pre-sale estimate of £8,000 to £12,000. So 4 really different, 4 really interesting lots I've given you a little interest in, and now I will pass over to Harry, who'll give you one of his favourite lots from the auction.
Right, thank you very much, Marcus. I've only got the one group to talk to you about today, but it is a really fascinating and entirely new to the market group of 5 to Lieutenant Colonel Henry Ernest Lavey of the Yorkshire Regiment. And yes, where do we start? He was commissioned first in 1898, actually into the Northamptonshire Regiment, but swiftly transferred to the Durham Light Infantry at the turn of the century, and was deployed into West Africa with the West African Frontier Force, which he served with for 5 years between 1904 and 1909. Coming back to Britain to a promotion as captain, he served at home from then until the start of the First World War, at which point he, as many of you may know, Britain being very short on experienced officers for staff roles, rather than immediately joining the fighting, he went into work as an embarkation staff officer with the Indian Army. It was not until 1916 that he was actually to see action, leaving a staff role upon the news of his brother's death in action with the New Zealand Expeditionary Force during the Somme offensive. Lavey was posted to the Yorkshire and Lancashire Regiment, first of all attached to them and finally promoted Lieutenant Colonel and posted to command the 6th Battalion, which he did for the rest of the war, earning an MID and Croix de Guerre. This in and of itself would have been an extremely impressive war. However, he wasn't done yet, offered the command of a battalion of the Yorkshire Regiment in North Russia, Archangel. He arrived there to find the battalion in fairly poor state. They'd gone some months without a commanding officer, discipline had been very lax, and frankly no one quite knew why they were there, as developed into a much greater problem later on. Lavey joined his unit at Celtisco. He was to become commander of the detachment there, the entire detachment. However, when he arrived, he discovered the battalion was effectively mutinying. General Ironside was on his way to deal with the problem of the mutiny, but Levis felt the need to act fast. He paraded his men unarmed and arrested 2 of the ringleaders, 2 sergeants, apparently previously members of the Pay Corps who had only just been posted out to Russia. This prompt action managed to save discipline in the unit, and when General Ironside arrived, expecting to meet a battalion in mutiny, he was instead informed that they had already marched to the front. Levis stayed in command at Seltysco for the duration of his time in North Russia, and indeed the duration of the British expedition to North Russia. His fighting here, his command here of the fighting was exemplary, and for that he was awarded the Distinguished Service Order and the Russian Order of St. Vladimir with swords. Returning to Britain in 1920, he saw home service and service in Northern Ireland, and retired in 1927. Sadly, he died the next year in Gibraltar due to ill health. This is, as I say, a fantastic group, entirely new to the market from the family, with another 2 awards as well, part of the honours and awards to the Levis family, one of which is the great-grandfather of Lieutenant Colonel Levis, Captain Sir Thomas Levis, commander of the Blanche during the famous Blanche action. This group is estimated at £1,500 to £2,000, and it is lot number 372. I'll now pass you over to Robert, who has a great many things to talk about.
As usual, I think. Thank you very much indeed, Harry. So, without further ado, we're going to kick off with undoubtedly my favourite lot of the entire auction, which I had great fun cataloguing and researching and trying to do justice to. This wonderful 2-clasp Naval General Service Medal, which was awarded to a chap called Lieutenant William Pilch. Now, before we get on to more of Pilch's life, it's actually rather interesting to note that this medal even comes with the original box of issue for addressed to Pilch. You can see his name inside there, and indeed on the top of the box as well. Now, this 2-clasp medal, the clasps being Trafalgar and Northumberland, 22nd of May 1812, are a unique combination to the Royal Navy, so that's got that going for it already. And indeed, William Pilch is a unique name on the roll. So for those medal collectors with a particular interest in the NGSM, I believe you've already got a few things to get excited about. But who was Lieutenant William Pilch? Well, he was a volunteer first class aboard the Bellerophon at the Battle of Trafalgar, otherwise known as the Billy Ruffian, particularly by the ordinary sailors of the time. Pilch had joined the Royal Navy only a year earlier, in 1804, at the tender age of just 10 years old. So at Trafalgar, he was only 11. Now, think about it, I can't imagine there were many, if any, junior officers at the Battle of Trafalgar to be of such a young age. And what led him to sea? Well, that in itself is quite an interesting thing to consider, and I think possibly worthy of a little more research, because in the paperwork that accompanies this lot, it's very clear that the Pilch family were from the same village in Norfolk as none other than the Nelsons. And indeed, Nelson's father, Edmund Nelson, was rector of the village church in which Pilch was later baptised. So whilst perhaps it is a little left to a little guesswork at the moment to state that they were definitely known to each other, I think, considering the period of time we're talking about, it would be almost impossible if the Nelsons and the Pilches weren't known to each other. So that may well have led young William to head to sea in 1804, with Nelson at the height of his career, and of course, sadly, to lose his life a year later at Trafalgar, where, of course, young William Pilch himself was to participate. So the Billy Ruffian was very much in the thick of the fighting at Trafalgar, and indeed she had 30% casualties, so a real tough fight, including her commanding officer, Captain John Cook, who was killed after personally leading a boarding party to repel some French boarders. He was killed in the act of reloading his pistols, having discharged them into the throng of charging Frenchmen. And Pilch himself happily survived the battle without a scratch, which is quite astonishing, really, when you think about it. An interesting point as well to note is that another junior officer aboard the Bellerophon at Trafalgar was none other than John Franklin, he of the tragic Northwest Passage expedition in the 1840s, when, of course, he was to lose his life in terrible circumstances along with the rest of his men. So it's fascinating to think that a young John Franklin and a young William Pilch would have been shipmates and probably would have shared the same accommodation, the midshipman's berth aboard the Billy Ruffian. So Pilch's career then took him further afield. He was aboard HMS Defiance, a 74-gun ship of the line, for the Battle of Saab d'Olonne in 1809. For an attack on 3 French frigates. Now, this was part of a larger squadron that Defiance fought it out alone in this attempt at a sort of cutting out action against these 3 French frigates. All of them were destroyed. The Defiance was essentially on her own for the majority of the battle due to having a shallower draft than the rest of the British squadron. So she went in close to shore, sort of beat up the French frigates, caused them all to be destroyed, and then got out again. Casualties were sustained, so it wasn't a one-sided action, despite the British ship being larger and more heavily gunned than her French opponents. He was then aboard HMS Northumberland for the action of the 22nd of May 1812, a very well-fought little action indeed, when Northumberland, on her own, fought off 2 French frigates and a brig. Basically, the French ships were returning from a commerce raiding expedition in the Atlantic. They were heading for home when the Northumberland, on blockading duties, barred their way. The French decided to try and evade Northumberland, again, her being more heavily gunned and larger than all the French ships combined. But unfortunately, their efforts to seek shelter came to naught when all 3 of them grounded on unknown reefs. So Northumberland, herself very aware of this danger and not wishing to fall into the same trap, stood off and bombarded all French ships from a distance. The 2 French frigates eventually caught fire, both exploded with loss of life. The brig was later refloated, but essentially Northumberland sailed away, duty done, and young William Pilch as well being aboard for that famous action, for which, of course, the clasp was then authorised. So another very fascinating point about Pilch's later life, which of course you may well have read in the catalogue. If you haven't already, then I would encourage you to do so. At the conclusion of the Napoleonic Wars, Pilch went for a while onto half pay. Of course, not a great prospect for naval officers. There wasn't a lot of action to see in the post-Napoleonic era, so he ended up joining the Coast Guard and became commander of a Coast Guard station on the Kent coast. That was, however, until he was appointed a Naval Knight of Windsor. The Naval Knights of Windsor are not particularly well known today, unlike their army counterparts, which are still going as the Military Knights of Windsor. You may see them at ceremonies such as the Garter ceremony at Windsor Castle, or indeed other ceremonial occasions in their red coats and cocked hats. Indeed, a previous incumbent of my role here at Spink is currently a Naval Knight of Windsor, and which is a fascinating link, I think, again, to draw. So who were the Naval Knights? Well, as the name suggests, you had to be a naval officer in order to be one, but they only existed from 1797 until 1892, and only 59 were ever appointed. So actually, it's a pretty unusual and rare position to have. The Naval Knights had to have been lieutenants upon retirement, so you couldn't have captains or midshipmen or admirals fulfilling the role. They had to be lieutenants. without family, so no dependents whatsoever. And I rather like the quote that I discovered in that they had to be inclined to lead a virtuous, studious and devout life. So no getting up to mischief and being naughty. Their duties, however, were not onerous. They generally had to turn up regularly to St George's Chapel in Windsor, wearing their full-dress naval uniform and attend the services and generally be good chaps. They didn't live in the castle themselves. They had purpose-built accommodation in the centre of Windsor, again, unlike the military knights, who to this day have little cottages in the grounds of Windsor Castle itself. And again, as you hopefully will see from the catalogue, I actually found a rather charming painting of the Naval Knights accommodation in Windsor with the castle in the background and a couple of Naval Knights wearing their uniforms in the foreground. So please do have a look at that if you'd like to know more about William Pilch and his life. So Pilch died then aged 70 in 1864 and is buried in Kent. Interestingly, his effects were bequeathed to one of his sisters, who was living only a few miles from the village in which they had all been brought up, again, very close to the Nelson family. So Pilch's Naval General Service Medal is lot 3, so nice and early on, and I expect I'll be taking this lot on the rostrum on the day, with an estimate of £12,000 to £15,000. And I think that's pretty fair considering the amount of history you've got here and a unique 2-class medal to an officer in the Royal Navy for 2 amazing actions of the Napoleonic Wars. So leaving the senior service now and going to the army is this Waterloo Medal. Now, of course, a lot of Waterloo medals around, but not many Waterloo medals to the Royal Scots Greys. And this particular Waterloo Medal was awarded to Private James Bruce of the 2nd Royal North British Dragoons for that famous action, their most famous action, arguably, in the history of the regiment, subject later on to, of course, Lady Elizabeth Butler's famous painting Scotland Forever, portrayed in great sort of gallant circumstance in the film Waterloo with Christopher Plummer and Rod Steiger then in 1970. And of course, the Scots Greys charged into history, repelling the French infantry assault at the real crisis point of the Battle of Waterloo itself. Not only that, but Private James Bruce was indeed wounded during the charge, and that is noted on his service papers. So he was wounded in the elbow by a sabre cut. So whilst we can't really sort of certify much more than that to exactly when and how he was wounded, it is highly likely that participating in the opening moments of the charge down the slope to the French Grand Battery, of course, those who know a little bit about Waterloo will then know that the cavalry became winded and ran out of steam, essentially. They were then counterattacked by French cavalry on their flank and forced to retreat all the way back up the slope to the safety of Wellington's main line. And I believe it's probably quite likely that Bruce was wounded during the French cavalry attack by a sabre from a French cavalryman. Now, of course, the Scots Greys were also noted at Waterloo because they captured one of the 2 French eagles to be captured that day. This was captured by Sergeant Ewart of the Scots Greys, and he captured that of the 45th Regiment of the French Line Infantry. And again, many stirring paintings and accounts have been portrayed and written about in subsequent history. So the Scots Greys, by the end of that fatal charge, lost about 50% of their men. So by the end of the Battle of Waterloo, they were in no fit state really to help in the pursuit of the defeated French army. Nevertheless, they stayed with the army and advanced into France and participated then in the Army of Occupation before heading home to Britain. So this particular Waterloo Medal is one of those that really does a lot for the imagination. And I think if you like your Waterloo medals, you're going to be hard-pressed to get a better one. So Private Bruce's medal for the Scots Greys is lot 10, with an estimate of £5,000 to £7,000. So you think about where he was, what he was doing. You've got the paintings, the being captured in film, lots of accounts of what the regiment was doing at Waterloo. Again, it's a really good thing indeed. So do have a look and maybe consider putting in a bid or two. So my penultimate lot then, to finish off, we have lot 21, which is this very charming Punjab medal with the two clasps there for Multan and Gujarat. Now, before we get into who it was awarded to, I actually rather like and should draw your attention to the box that it's contained in, because it's a completely bespoke little leather box here named Lieutenant C.R. Barclay Colcott, 10th Regiment. And indeed, on the reverse, it has a little paper label stuck to it, which reads as follows. My medal of the campaign in the Punjab is to be given to the eldest surviving son of my late brother George Wallace of Oundle, September 1907, C. Barclay Colcott. So already the date is perhaps getting your attention, 1907, and yet the Punjab campaign happened in the 1840s. Well, the medal itself is named, as the box suggests, to Lieutenant C.R.B. Colcott of the 10th Regiment of Foot. Now, a fantastic name for a start, Charles Roland Barclay Colcott, a unique name as you might expect, lots of research potential there. Now, when I was researching him, I actually had to do a double take when I worked out when he was born and when he died, because he was born in 1827 and actually died in 1921. So he was 94 years old at the time of his death. It just makes you think, really, that he was born during the reign of George IV, saw through William IV and Victoria and Edward VII, and lived into the reign of George V. You know, he saw everything from campaigns in India and would have seen the First World War happen and, you know, lived through to the end of it. And I also think he is possibly the last surviving officer of the Punjab campaign. I can't prove that, but perhaps I'll set you the mission of proving me wrong. And so it's really quite a bit of social history there that I just wanted to mention rather than the campaigns itself. And I think for the Punjab collector, or indeed the collector of Victorian campaign medals, I think it's a wonderful medal. What is also quite intriguing is that a diary written by the young Charles Colcott is in the collection of the National Army Museum. Now, I didn't have time to go away and research it in the course of writing this medal up, but my catalogue description lists the National Army Museum's catalogue number. And so I think, again, for the person that buys this medal, you should go off to the National Army Museum, to the archives, go and look up young Lieutenant Colcott's diary and see what treasures it might contain of his life in India. So this is lot 21 with an estimate of £400 to £500. It's worth all of that and more. And I think there's a fantastic story there with more to be discovered. So finally then, on to staying in India with a hint of the Punjab, but more into the Indian Mutiny. And I'm going to start off by picking up, not a medal, but a teapot. And why am I holding up a teapot? Well, it's all going to become very clear very shortly. But here, and it's a slightly broken teapot as well. So, but therein lies a wonderful story. So here we have the Companion of the Bath, Punjab and two-clasp Indian Mutiny medal to a chap called Charles Barwell. Now, Charles Barwell of the 71st Bengal Infantry served with the regiment as a young officer during the Punjab campaign. No clasps, unlike Colcott's medal that I've just shown you. However, two clasps on his Indian Mutiny medal. And one of those is, of course, the one that everyone wants to see for the Indian Mutiny, the defence of Lucknow. So Barwell was, in fact, Brigade Major and Town Adjutant of Lucknow during the siege. So a very important position indeed. And in fact, he was there at the time, not just on his own, but with his wife, Emily. They were actually living at Lucknow at the time that the siege broke out. And that leads me on to talking about the teapot. But I'm going to come to that again. I'm going to keep you guessing for just a short while longer. So Charles Barwell was mentioned in dispatches several times during the course of his mutiny service. He is also mentioned in several primary sources of the siege. Again, you can read all about those in my catalogue entry. And he was promoted from captain to lieutenant colonel in under 2 years during this time. So I think that is evidence enough that he was a very good soldier indeed, a very good officer, and did his duty excellently during some very, very terrifying and trying times. He retired in 1880 as a lieutenant general again, so lots of good service there. Now, in addition, of course, to the campaign medals, as I alluded to, he was made a Companion of the Bath in the 1870s. And the lot comes with a couple of photographs, original photographs of him and his wife. But the teapot, finally onto the teapot. Well, the teapot, by family repute, has always been with the medals, and indeed is from the King of Oude's palace, which was part of the compound of Lucknow during the siege itself. It's slightly broken, as you can see. It's got some chips there and a little bit knocked off the top, possibly not due to enemy action. I think maybe more due to actually just sort of carelessness. But by family repute, used during the siege by Emily Barwell when the officers' wives, also shut up during the siege, were making the best of it, and some things had to continue. You may be aware of the famous Carry On film, Carry On Up the Khyber, when, of course, the officers are all taking tea and the plaster is falling from the ceiling due to enemy artillery. I'm not going to go quite that far and say that it was exactly like that when this teapot was used, but I like to think that the teapot may indeed have seen some action of its own. So, as well as the medals themselves and indeed the teapot, one of the lots features General Barwell's sword, and also we have the medals of one of their sons, Major Edward Egerton Barwell, also Indian Army, also saw a huge amount of service during his time, who was very tragically killed in action on the Western Front in the opening weeks of the Great War in 1914 at the head of one of his companies of Indian troops. That comprises lot 68. So again, please do go and have a look in the catalogue and read the sad story of one of their sons. So General Barwell's medals comprise lot 336, with an estimate of £2,400 to £2,800. Again, worth all of that for the story, I'm sure you'll agree. And like everything that we've talked about here today, undoubtedly they will find new homes, and hopefully there'll be lots of spirited bidding on the day. So you will see Marcus, Harry and I on the rostrum on the 4th of April, Tuesday the 4th of April, not that long to go now, only a couple of weeks. Catalogues should be winging their way to you. And again, if you have any questions or queries about these or any other lots that you can read about, please don't hesitate to get in touch. We hope you've enjoyed our little YouTube video for today, and we look forward to seeing you all again soon. Thank you very much indeed. Goodbye.